Hi everyone. We're just gonna let people join, and then we'll start in a couple of minutes or even a minute. Great. If you wouldn't mind, as you join, please keep your audio on mute so that we don't get any interruptions during the talk. Okay. All right. Well, people missed the introduction. It's not the worst thing, so I'm gonna get started. So welcome to 10 years of Karachi LaJamia. We're so delighted to have Fiza Khatri, Zahra Malkani, Shahana Rajani with us today. And thank you all of our wonderful audience for joining us. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what Art South Asia Project is. You might already be aware of us, and if you're not, here's a little bit of a reminder. So we're a UK-based arts education and development non-profit, and we were established in 2021. Our mission is to facilitate and expand networks of collaboration and research, documenting and highlighting narratives and histories of modern and contemporary South Asian visual and applied arts. And we support initiatives through grants and by creating opportunities for engagement, partnering with individuals and institutions within South Asia and the UK. ASAP creates programs around research, archiving, and publications and fosters professional development through workshops, talks, symposia, and fellowships. So you're not here to talk about us, we're here to talk about the wonderful speakers. And so before I hand over the floor to these wonderful speakers that we have today, I'm going to introduce them. Starting with Karachi LaJamia, who we have two wonderful artists on the screen, Zahra and Shahana. Karachi LaJamia was founded in 2015 by artists Shahana Rajani and Zahra Malkani as a nomadic space moving outside the institution to explore new radical pedagogies and art practices. We have facilitated, or you have facilitated, a series of site-specific courses and collaborative research projects to explore the intersections of militarism, climate crisis, indigenous dispossession, and knowledge production in Karachi. Their courses are developed in close collaboration with local organizations and activists to build solidarity with ongoing struggles around land, water, and development in the city. So to introduce our moderator, Fiza Khatri, who is also a very close friend of Zahra and Shahana. Fiza Khatri was born and grew up in Karachi, Pakistan. Their work represents intimate portraits and gatherings of human and non-human inhabitants of their community. They remix imagery from lived experiences, imagined fantasies, sacred landscapes, and archival research to implicate the social, sacral, and political stakes of building ecosystems of cohabitation. Khatri received their MFA from Yale School of Art in 2023 and was awarded a BA from Mount Holyoke College in 2015. They were the recipient of a Daedalus Foundation MFA Fellowship in Painting and Sculpture in 2023, and their work was recently featured in Frieden's Press 2022 publication Great Women Painters and has been exhibited most recently at Samio's Paris, Mickey Meng, Thomas Urban, and Periton. There are many more exhibition histories which I could talk about, but I'm going to move on to a few housekeeping points before I hand over the floor. This session will take place for about 45 minutes to an hour, and there will be time for questions afterwards. As you're thinking about questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll speak to them once Zahra, Shahana, and Fiza have finished their conversation. Please do try and stay on mute if possible during the duration of the talk, so this doesn't interrupt the flow of the conversation. And lastly, if you have missed any part of the talk or if any friends who haven't been able to join the talk, this session it will be recorded and will go on our YouTube and website in the coming weeks. So I've spoken a lot. I'm going to give the floor over to Fiza, Zahra, and Shahana. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for those lovely introductions, Mala, and thank you for having us. Thank you for everyone else at ASAP as well who supported with this. I'm so happy to be here. This is totally a treat for me, as I've said to Zara and Shahana and Mala before, to be able to be in conversation with Karachi LaJamia, a project that I have loved from, I think, the start when I first heard of it. And yeah, to reflect on sort of 10 years of your practice. And there's, there's which is like an incredible milestone, and I'm so sort of grateful that we get to do this together. And also just to say that there's a lot to talk about. Like every time we've had like a prep conversation, there's just been so much. So we're not gonna hit everything, but this is just kind of, like my hope is for us to kind of touch upon like some of the major bodies of work that LaJamia has produced, your methodology, your uh, sort of like these models that you've created for engaging with the city that I think all of us have been also, whether we know it or not, like consciously or subconsciously learning from, picking up from, and just to sort of name some of those things and bring them out. So thank you, and yeah, let's start. I think maybe we just start with like the beginning. Karachi LaJamia began in 2015. You published a statement on which I remember reading on Facebook at the time and getting really excited about it. And that statement was kind of like the launch of Karachi LaJamia, which at the time was called Karachi Anti-Art University, and Karachi Art Anti-University. Sorry, um, important distinction. And
This is
it
why
kind
we
of,
also had to change the name because it
yeah, which we want to hear about more too. But yeah, like the statement kind of really located this sort of the launch of this project in that particular moment. It was both like a call for artists to kind of come together under new ways of working and a response to what was happening politically at the time, specifically the murders of Sabine Mahmood and Dr. Khalidur Rahman. So if you could just sort of begin by situating us in that moment and talking about that initial impetus to launch the project, how you were kind of understanding what was happening in the city and what needed to sort of happen in response to it, like as artists, as educators. Yeah, if you can just kind of talk us through and then maybe also reflect on the changing of the name that came soon after.
Thank you, Fiza, Mala. Me and Zara were just saying that, yeah, there's something about the title of just 10 years that has us both feeling really emotional. And yeah, we're really happy to be here with everyone today. Yeah, I guess if to start from the start, I guess around the time that we started Karachi LaJamia in 2015, was a moment where in the past years, me and Zara had really been noticing, seeing, feeling the ways in which the city was really being militarized rapidly. So, when we both shifted back from grad school to Karachi, the Karachi operation, which is a military operation, was really violently being unleashed on certain neighborhoods in the city. As we started teaching in art schools and universities, we were also noticing in the period of 1 and 2 years of how much the university was also being militarized, turned into a security enclave. In 2015 specifically is a time when the Unsilencing Balochistan campaign is happening, where there are communities who are speaking back to this militarization, to speak specifically in this case about enforced disappearances and missing persons. And it was in this really heightened time of censorship, repression, violence, militarization that Sabine hosted a talk where she invited some of the activists who were leading the Unsilencing Balochistan campaign and the Voice for Baloch Missing Persons. And it was on her way home from the talk that she gets murdered. And I think that that moment changed everything for us and for everyone, all cultural workers in Karachi, where I feel till then we had really felt like we were working in our own bubble. The state didn't care about us. We could make or do anything and get away with it. But I think as something when this happens, the stakes become really high. Um, and maybe Yazar, I let you continue. I'm already getting emotional.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we were coming from the space where Shahana and I had this shared practice. We're connected over this kind of shared desire in our practices as artists, but also as teachers, and also in just how we were living our lives of wanting to reconnect with the city and to build a different kind of a relationship with the city that was rapidly undergoing a real acceleration in militarization and securitization. And also a city that, in media, that we also felt was a city that was really overdetermined and increasingly being represented in local and international media as a city that is kind of teeming with the possibility, the potential of violence, and a real kind of a way in which media, from mainstream news media to like novels, art production, etc., all were kind of being deployed to create a pervasive sense of fear around the city. And I think Shahana and I came together in our practices as artists, as teachers, and just as people, as women in the city, of wanting to move beyond these narratives and these ideas and think about other ways of being in and relating to the city. And I think in 2015, when we see the ways in which this kind of accelerating militarism and securitization, 2 years into the Karachi operation, is really directly brutalizing our own communities and is really becoming increasingly present and visible in the institutions that we worked in. We really came together over this desire to not capitulate in that moment and to think of other ways in which we could maintain and create space for connection with the city. We were working in institutions that were so barricaded, that were so securitized themselves, and where students were so policed, students, faculty, guests also policed, and the sense of surveillance was also on the rise. And so we wanted to think of other ways of being in the city and of doing our practices in the city. And so I think Karachi LaJamia was this really spontaneous moment to kind of emerge out of this real sense of urgency in that moment of just trying to make something else possible, or trying to experiment with what the other possibilities of pedagogy in the city would be, especially in the context of an art world that we had felt was getting increasingly depoliticized. I think another part of that story is also that while we see and witness this increasing securitization and militarism, and how all the ways in which it's seeping into these institutions and also kind of shutting down institutions like Orangi Pilot Project, like T2F, these cultural spaces are being brutalized, right? Syed Hashmi Reference Library. At the same time, there's also this growth happening in the cultural sector. Suddenly, the Karachi literature, all the literature festivals in Pakistan are like proliferating. There's like Karachi Youth Initiative and Karachi Peace Something, and all of this stuff that's really kind of coming in from this like aid donor networks that are the kind of expressions of the war on terror and like this kind of post-war on terror moment of all this money also coming in. And so we're kind of seeing, on the one hand, this securitization, brutalization, degradation of a certain kind of cultural and educational sphere and world in Karachi, and also the emergence of this new sanitized culture and securitized cultural sphere as well. And so we wanted to, I think there was a real sense of urgency to experiment with and think about what other practices were possible in that moment that could directly address and engage and grapple with these political processes that we were experiencing without while also avoiding all of these cliches of like a kind of violent, dangerous city.
Yeah, and I just want to mention, it's something that we might come back to later, but everything that you're talking about, this sort of situating in that moment, you also lay out in the first academic text you publish, which is The Abolition of the University, which is kind of doing this really incredible labor also of like naming and tracing these lineages of both how state repression in educational and cultural spaces has been a part of the Pakistani state's response to thank you, to dissent, to cultural dissent, to sort of alternative forms of knowledge production that are coming, that are really sort of questioning the dominant sort of nationalist frameworks that the state once represented in these academic and cultural institutions. Um, and you sort of trace that timeline from like the earliest instance in 52, I think it is, in Dhaka University, where students are sort of attacked for a language movement protest. Up until then, you know, through the 2015 murders as well. And so I just sort of to mention that you're also like a big part of Karachi LaJamia is also doing this sort of like scholarly work of like tracing these lineages of state repression, student like protest movements as well in response to that, how sort of that has played out in the history of Pakistan. And then absolutely in that moment where there is sort of a privatization and securitization, almost as a response to sort of the violent city where there's, you know, more borders being created, the walls keep going higher, they become more and more militarized, both at private universities and just sort of in the infrastructure of the city. And so La Jamia kind of in that initial statement really challenges that, saying that that's not the way we are safe. That's not the way to respond uh, to state repression, to these murders, which you also call, I think, messages for our communities, for cultural workers, for educators. Um, yeah, so I mean, there's a lot there already that we will definitely come back to
Can
as
I
well. Yes,
can I
yes,
say
please jump
something
in.
to that? That I think that in 2015, when our community feels under attack, when Sabine Skill, when Professor Wahidur Rahman, who worked in Karachi University, gets shot, um, is really the moment in which me and Zahra are also in real time realizing this very long the consequences of this very long history of repression. Because in that moment, a big kind of wake up call that we have is, you know, when our community is under and our spaces are under attack, we look around us and that everyone is so quiet, right? And a big question we were like just really struggling with is like, why is everyone not out on the streets? Why are we not up day and night fighting, you know, creating noise, just doing something? Why is no one turning to public space to do that kind of, you know, protest? And I think in that moment when we like face this big question, I think one of the answers that we find and that we realize is a lot of this depoliticization lies in the way in which education is being taught in Pakistan. Why are students, why are our communities not out on the streets right now is because they have systematically over decades that impulse has been numbed and taken away from them in the way in which education and art is being taught and practiced. And so I think it was in that realization we also knew that whatever we have to do, our project will and has to be pedagogical in nature.
Mm, mm, mm.
Yeah, and I think on
Thank
the
you.
other side, sorry, I think
No,
on the
please
other
go
side
ahead.
of
Go
that, there
ahead.
was also like a real sense of, yeah, you know, what Shahana is saying about, yeah, that problem is also kind of built into the governance of the city and the kind of built environment of the city, the ways in which communities are so deeply separate and so deeply disconnected. And I think like on the one hand, we were aware of this kind of depoliticization that was happening, and we were kind of uh, disturbed by the silence that we were seeing in some of the communities that we moved around in. And on the other hand, really, really aware of just the incredible work that is being done in so many communities in Karachi on ground to resist these processes, and being really aware of the lack of connection. And you know, like that there are worlds of knowledge production, there are literary worlds and cultural productions that are incredibly resistant, that are incredibly counter-hegemonic, that are incredibly continuing to situate them, that are incredibly antagonistic to the state. and aren't capitulating, that and aren't backing down, and how much these worlds of like knowledge production and literary production are and cultural production are so separate from so many of the literary, cultural, and educational spaces that we were working in. And so with Karachi LaJamia, the desire was really that to kind of uh, think through that dissonance and to kind of yeah, an attempt at building connections across that.
Totally. And another way that you name that in Abolition of the University is talking about how the privatization of the university and sort of the securitization as as privatization of the university also just really disconnected these educational cities from educational spaces from the city itself. Like how that disconnection was also, as you're saying, like cultural infrastructure and almost this idea that we're in this sort of a bubble of our own. Like we don't need to know what's happening outside. The outside is violent. It's awful. It's, we're good here. My favorite line in the Lajamia statement is the right of creepy uncles to paint nudes, something like that. Which is, which you identify as like the neoliberal idea of freedom, right? That these spaces are advocating for in that moment, and you're like, no, that's not it. Like that's not what what is at stake here. So maybe this is a good
Yeah.
moment to talk about,
Yeah, I just want to
yeah,
say, sorry. Yeah, that's
yeah,
not it, right? But on the one hand, there's also like a real sense of there's a reason why art schools or galleries or like art environments became insular spaces, became spaces that yeah, became such insular environments. There was also a sense of kind of self-protection that led to that kind of um, these spaces being that way, and not to say that that's not real, that there weren't ways in that didn't serve a purpose. They also felt like in this moment it didn't serve that same purpose anymore.
totally, yeah. Um, okay, I'm also just looking at the time, and I'm like, whoa, we really, yeah. Um, So maybe we talk about maybe if you can quickly talk about then the name change from the Karachi Art University to Karachi LaJamia, because I think that also opens up methodologically perhaps how you're conceiving of pedagogy at the time from how you've described it in the past, how that sort of what sort of that reframing in language makes possible. And then, touching upon sort of then these alternatives that you are creating pedagogically with the project, this sort of deep situatedness in the city, the nomadism, the site specificity, working with indigenous communities, working with the ecology, really kind of like creating these courses like the arts and politics course, the Gadab sessions, Hamare Siyal Rishte, um, like actual courses that sort of create modes of learning in the city. You can talk about that.
Yeah, I think so. I think when we wrote that statement and when we kind of uh, founded what at the time was called Karachi Art University as a project, I think it was again this like really impulsive act in a moment of a real sense of urgency. And I don't think we had any plans for the future. I don't think we had ever imagined that we'd be working on this for 10 years, which is why perhaps that name was not super well thought through. Um, and yeah, and in that moment of urgency, we really very quickly and immediately wanted to yeah, put together a course that we had called Art and Politics in the City, which was really dedicated to moving from site to site, of these spaces that we were aware of and had relationships with, where the kind of uh, pedagogical work and organizing work that we wanted to see in the world was happening. And again, the desire was to kind of hold events over there, hold a series of sessions over there that would again kind of bring students and academics and people in the art world into contact and relation with these spaces as well. Um, and so, yeah, and so that was a kind of a 10-week long course. And again, very much within that kind of site specific method that we've been using all along. Um, and yeah, at the time we didn't know if Karachi Art Anti-University would be anything beyond that. And I think we were really moved by the response and the interest and the experiences that we had doing that first course. And kind of once that course was done, we made a decision that this was going to be a more long-term project between me and Shahana. Um, and that was a moment where we were like, okay, perhaps we need to rethink this name because it is a mouthful, and it was a name that kind of yeah, that just felt a little bit clunky. And so we wanted to rethink it. And one of the things that we felt we wanted to do was that we didn't want Karachi LaJamia to be named in English. We wanted an Urdu name for Karachi LaJamia. Um, and yeah, at the time, I think everything that we've done as Karachi LaJamia, nothing that we've done as Karachi LaJamia is just limited to me and Shahana. It's really everything that happens in Karachi LaJamia is an expression of like a larger community. And so in this case, we had reached out to our friend Hajra Haider Karar, who's a curator, and her father, who's a poet, is the one who suggested to us the name Karachi La Jamia in a really beautiful email that he had written to us, in which he had kind of thought through different possibilities of translating the word anti-university, which we felt we felt a little disconnected from that name because the idea of anti-university, again, it felt kind of overdetermined, and we wanted something looser. We wanted something that was a little bit more open than anti. And we felt that that prefix la before Jamia was a little bit more open than the word anti. It did kind of do that word of negating and saying this is not a university, but it also opened up another set of possibilities of what else this could be. And it also, yeah, it created something a little bit more mysterious and open than anti-university. And so that's how we ended up with La Jamia. Yeah, and I think even like the kind of dropping of the word art, I think it's interesting. We don't really, yeah, there's many languages in the world that don't have a word for art because art is not necessarily seen as separate from life in many communities and cultures and languages. And so, yeah, so I think as that shift in name was also, yeah, was also somehow uh, constitutive of what Karachi La Jamia went on to become and the spirit it went on to take.
Yeah, because la means basically no, right? Like that's sort of the literal translation of the word. And so from anti-university, you almost go to like a translation could be no university. And that already sort of opens up so much in terms of how that scholarly institutional space or not institutional space, Jamia, I guess is I mean I'm not that familiar with the Arabic, but um, yeah, just how it sort of opens up the ways of relating to the educational space, I think is really beautiful in that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think again, also because Shahana and I were working, we were both working at universities at
yes.
the time, which was something that people would bring up often when the name Anta University came up. And I think that, yeah, we didn't want to, yeah, we wanted there to be a little bit more nuance there that, yeah, we do this practice of Karachi La Jamia that imagines what education, knowledge production, research connection could look like outside of the university, study could look like outside of the university. But we are also deeply invested in the future of universities in Pakistan. Um, so yeah, that's also something important to us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that is so evident in, again, that research work you've done in tracing those lineages of how the military, the university has become militarized, again, that's sort of this like warning sign almost, like, to be like, this is happening. We need to name it. We need to talk about it. Like it's not like you're not and you've continued to teach throughout these 10 years at institutions while you sort of also nurture this pedagogical project alongside it. Um, so, I mean, where do we want to go from here? Okay. Maybe we can then talk about sort of what these forms of pedagogy then do make possible. Like if you can reflect on some of the ways that the forms of knowing and being and um, uh, which feel very relational, like these practices are happening in collaboration with communities, with activists, with spaces, cultural spaces that you've mentioned, like the Sayed Hashmi Reference Library, with this Indigenous Rights Alliance. You're forging these really beautiful relationships with them. You're traveling to like parts of the city that are named no zones or conflict zones under like the language of counterterrorism efforts in Pakistan. And you're sort of doing this work of, to me, what sort of I keep coming back to is like you're doing this work of like seeing and unseeing the ways that both the state wants us to see these places and these communities and these projects, and then the way that Indigenous communities in response are doing their own form of seeing as well. So how these things kind of like come together in, let's say, Gadab, where like, the state kind of sees it as like Banjar, Ghairabad, like barren, uninhabited, and then you're working with the Sindh Indigenous Rights Alliance, who are like, there are like this like rivers here, like seasonal rivers, and like that's like a grazing ground for like this person and there. So there are sort of it's the way that the land sort of holds all of this knowledge and all of this history that the state wants us to actively unsee. And something about sort of the way that you're conducting these courses is really untangling that. So if we talk about Gadap for a moment, could you reflect on the sort of the ways of seeing the land that these sort of that you're building into these courses, like what are these situated forms of knowledge like making possible, like how are you sort of build, like what is the work that is happening in these courses on site?
I really like how you this kind of this that how you're teasing out that tension between seeing and unseeing that is so present in all spaces we have worked in. And so, for instance, in Gadap, what you're mentioning in 2016, me and Zahra organized a course in collaboration with the Karachi Indigenous Rights Alliance, where we got together a group of, I think we were 13 people. We did an open call, and it was a 6-month long course where we were working with this activist group to really map, document, and witness the ways in which this really huge real estate development company was occupying and destroying the land. And I think in that work, just to give an example of this like seeing, unseeing that's constantly happening, is I think really early on, it became really clear to the entire group that for the communities whose lands are being occupied and destroyed by Beria Town, the struggle is not just about the physical land, is not just about protecting the land. The struggle is also at the level of the image, because what these private and state developers are doing, exactly what you were saying, Fiza, is they're unleashing these imaginaries and visualities of the city as the 3 words you use over and over again is Banjar, Ghair Abad, Ghair Mahfuz. So barren, uninhabited, and insecure, of course. And the ways and the communities and activists we were working with were actually really aware and were really experiencing the violence of these visualities at play. And so again, there was this sense where, yes, we're witnessing something really enormous and violent happening that's transforming city and communities and land and ecologies. But we were also in this process uh, constantly being reminded kind of what is at stake also as artists, and in what is at stake is the politics of representation, is visuality, that the ways in which we choose to represent a landscape actually has really immense consequences for people who are living with that land. And I think that's a learning that we got really early on in the Gadap sessions. And again, learning from people around us who are really engaged in these struggles, of the ways in which they choose to represent their land, the ways in which they choose to talk about the relationships. What can we learn from those? Zahra, maybe you continue.
No, I think that was great. I think, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where aesthetics come in, right? Like I feel like I'm having so many conversations with so many people today as well about just like the role of artists in this moment, like, facing like multiple catastrophes and crises and a genocide and just like this feeling of either like complete paralysis or just like a futility of like what we as artists might have to offer in this moment. And I think that's something that I really sort of feel strongly about the work that the two of you have done and what it has to teach us in this moment is to be like, no, actually, the way we see, which is everything that artists kind of deal with working in any kind of visual medium, is what makes certain ways of being in the world possible or not. And yeah, Shahana, I think you said that so incredibly. Yeah, it sort of makes me think of sort of, and there's a long time we can spend just talking about the formal decisions that you're making in the work as well, because I mean, the courses are happening where, in some ways like the research is happening or like the ways of being, or I don't mean research as in it's not like, I mean, an expanded definition perhaps of what research means. And the learning is happening and the being with the land and listening to the land and sort of like wrestling with these ways of seeing and unseeing the land. And then that sort of, there's sort of material that is collected and created in those courses, from what I understand, that then is sort of, then with that material, you sort of contend with questions of form, right? Where it's like from the Gadab sessions, for instance, you made the Jinnah Avenue film, you made Of Struggle, which is a web archive, an interactive web archive, or a digital work, really, that sort of works through some of these things in ways that are, that also really sort of, yeah, that really wrestle with these questions of representation and legibility and like or like rejecting linear narratives around like what even the history of Gadab has been. Um, I mean, I'm thinking, for instance, of Struggle, which has like kaleidoscopic imagery that sort of both obscures and plays with visualities of the land. There's a map that you created as well, where it sort of like lists. It's almost like an alternative map to like what is made available by the state, where we're really seeing how the community sees their own land, their own landmarks, their ways of remembering it. The title of Struggle also comes from Pahwado Jabal, which is a mountain in Gadab, which sort of translates to of struggle. Um, so I mean, there's a lot we can talk about form, but maybe we talk about maps for a little while, because I think there's something really interesting about sort of how the map is sort of one of those visual technologies that both the state and prior to the state, the colonizer has used as a way to erase features on the land, like aspects of the land, and then how you've both sort of like contended with that, and then which you talk about in Lab syllabus really beautifully. But if you can talk about that, how you've kind of gone from you've had your own journey with the map, so to speak, and I'll let you kind of speak more about that.
Mind if I just jump in just for, I mean, I feel like we could keep talking for hours, but just to give you guys a 5 to 10 minute warning on time. And if the audience has questions, please do start putting them in the chat as they're speaking about this, the wonderful maps that I've just watched Raksha's Railway yesterday. So I think this formation of land through these colonial kind of structures is a really interesting topic. So anyway, over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think going a little bit further back to how the first project or one of the first projects that Shahana and I worked on together, which was Exhausted Geographies. And in Exhausted Geographies, this is 2013. So when we began working on that project, and that was about 2 years before Karachi LaJamia, or less than that. Um, and we were kind of coming from this place of thinking about Karachi as this overdetermined city that was, yeah, just becoming the subject of an incredible amount of cultural production locally and around the world. Again, that was kind of constantly framing it as this kind of city teeming with violence and danger and terrorism. And wanting to think about Karachi in other ways, wanting to think about the possibility of studying, connecting with, representing Karachi in other ways, and wanting to bring together an interdisciplinary community of academics and artists and architects who we could kind of think through that together with. And I think one of the works that we curated into Exhausted Geographies that also really influenced us moving forward was a text by Nausheen Anwar. And in that text, I won't go too much into it because we don't have a lot of time, but that text kind of got us thinking a lot about, um, yeah, about the ways in which map-based representations of Karachi had over the years become really ubiquitous in mainstream media, and how they were being deployed and mobilized to build support for what then became a military operation in Karachi, the Karachi operation. Yeah, and so we were kind of thinking about ways in which, there were daily crime maps in Express Tribune of Karachi. And then Dawn had kind of started this GIS department where they produced this map that kind of created this like set of no-go zones that imagined that they claimed were hotbeds for terrorists lurking and hanging out in Karachi. And those no-go zones and those red zones were precisely those spaces that then became subject to incredible military brutality. They became kind of the hotbeds of encounter, of killings and things like that. Yeah, and so, it really got us thinking about not just this like colonial history of map making as a tool for occupation and colonial violence and a colonial kind of restructuring of land and, accumulation of land, but also thinking about how that legacy lives on today in the map form. And I think, and for that reason, I think then 2 years later when we did Karachi LaJamia, and over these years with the Karachi operation, we've kind of seen the city really get like gouged out and barricaded and checkpoints and like rangers, like jockeys popping up everywhere. I think in that moment, that's why the site specificity in our courses was really important to us, that the courses take place where the processes that we are studying are in real time going down. And that the courses are also then conducted in collaboration with communities that are directly affected by it and communities that are organizing against those processes that are happening, and also that have a very long and rich history of organizing and resisting these processes as well. And so that kind of really became central to the Karachi LaJamia methodology, A, of that site specificity, and B, of every course being conducted collaboratively. And then, creating this space for connection and relation. And because of that history of map making and the ubiquity of the map image in the ways in which Karachi was seen, yeah, the map continued to be really central to our practice, even as we resisted it. Shahana, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I guess we're almost out of time, but maybe just for a few minutes. Yeah, so, and it's again, I think so much to do with this like seeing, unseeing tension, where you're really struggling with this responsibility to represent all that you are witnessing, but then also knowing that the impulse to unveil, to render things transparent brings with it its own violence. So it's this really kind of is a dance that you're constantly trying to figure out. But I think with the map specifically, when we were doing Gadab sessions, the Karachi Indigenous Rights Alliance had asked us to produce a map for them to document all of the villages, the historical landmarks, sites, disappearing rivers, all the things that Beria Town was eradicating. And in the process, and this was a really this was a practical map, right? Not a artistic conceptual thing where they needed this as proof. And so we're using GPS and we're using our phones and we have this like satellite map that we're marking things on. And I think, of course, that in that process, you know the value of doing this work, but we were also constantly coming up against the violence of it and the limitation of that form and the ways in which it was reducing and removing and erasing all the complexities that we were experiencing and all that we were witnessing. And so, yeah, so we've gone through, long engagements with the map, and often those engagements have been really have left us feeling really disillusioned with the map form that we're constantly up against the limits of it. And Off Struggle, the website that we were mentioning earlier, that we made with a friend of ours, Abira Kamran, was an attempt to really reimagine what the exercise of mapping could be like, and without reproducing the map form. But just to end, so the last few years we've been doing research that kind of sprung off from this workshop called Hamari Syal Rishte, which actually the first iteration Fiza had asked us to host and organize. So it's lovely connections and things coming together. But in the course of that work, where we were working with organizations and communities, thinking about the histories of our city's water ecologies and the histories and pedagogies of environmental struggle linked to that, we've been coming across and sitting with people and activists, and oftentimes when we're asking them about the river, activists or community elders will draw a map for us, or will offer to draw a map for us where, they take out a notebook and a pencil, and it's this most moving practice of drawing the lines, naming the forms, and these are mostly, right, a lot of these lines and forms no longer exist in the city, but we kept coming up again and again of this kind of the gesture of someone who has lived and known this land and river and water for so long, drawing for us. And there's just in that act of drawing and invocation happens, that there is um, a really deep and almost sacred relationship with the water that's being invoked every time someone is taking that pencil up and drawing the form of a river, which is, of course, always changing. And I think witnessing these people drawing for us, I think, has somehow really done a full circle where it's made us realize that these moments have redeemed the map form for us, that these forms can actually be really hopeful, and really a practice of so much love and so much care. So I feel you had a thought you can add.
Yeah, I think, what you're saying about kind of going full circle, because with Exhausted Geographies, we started out with this project that was really kind of against the map form. And even in Gadap sessions, we really, we kind of, mapping and counter mapping was also so central to what we were doing. But there was also this desire to kind of really, undo, to kind of collapse and rupture what we think about as the map form, and thinking against the ways in which the map flattens space and how it kind of the limits and constraints it puts on the kind of story that you can tell about space. Um, and I think that in the years since then, over the years, we've kind of found ourselves returning again and again to the map form as this, as not this kind of. I mean, I think like one thing that's important that we haven't been able to mention yet about Karachi LaJamia is that it's not really a goal-oriented project. For us, the pedagogy is the practice, the course is the practice, and we don't undertake these courses with any idea that at the end of the course, there will be some body of work that will then be circulated in public. That's not necessary. If that ends up happening, that's great. And often it does. But that's not that's not the goal that we set out with. The goal is that moment, that pedagogical environment, and those experiences and the relations that are then built in that process, are transformed in that process. Um, yeah, and I think that perhaps that has also kind of played a role in redeeming the map form for us, where the map is not kind of some object that is then being produced for circulation and it's like this kind of final statement on space. There's just the map is just this kind of like an act of love, an act of kind of showing another person a way. It's just an act of kind of hospitality. It's an act of helping someone find their way, helping someone out. Um, and we find our like notebooks kind of littered with these, not littered, littered is the wrong word, kind of our notebooks are bestowed, are like full of these like really rough maps that are drawn, on dhaba napkins, that are drawn on like whatever piece of paper was around on the back of like some, newspaper at a dhaba. And that was just made kind of in that moment, but that then became the grounds for a really incredible, beautiful conversation or connection to emerge. Um, and so I think, yeah, and I think in that sense, we kind of think about these maps not as these aesthetic objects, but as energetic forms that are kind of imbued with the kind of the spirit of that desire for connection and hospitality and sharing. Yeah.
That's
Yeah, and I
beautiful.
think again, kind of
Yeah.
just to highlight, just kind of, yeah, with every course that we've done in Karachi LaJamia, Hamare Siyal Rishte, the translation of that is our fluid relations, our watery relations. Um, and yeah, and these courses are really just spaces for the building and transforming of relations. And over the course of these 10 years, we've been collaborating consistently with people and groups and community organizations that are doing really, really incredible work in Karachi, like the Indigenous Rights Alliance, like the Fisher Folk Forum. We're really influenced by a whole rich body of work and literature and academic and knowledge production in Sindhi and Baloch worlds that is so full of so much knowledge about Karachi. One of the founders of the Indigenous Rights Alliance, Gul Hassan Kalmati, and yeah, one of the elders of the Pakistan Fisher Folk Forum, Majid Mutani. These are all prolific writers and scholars, and Karachi LaJamia is really kind of emerges from and is indebted to and is in the kind of tradition of that work.
I think that's a great last word, probably, to end on. Yeah, thank you so much. There's so much more to talk about. I feel like we could do like 4 more parts of this, but I'm really grateful for all your reflections, for, yeah, just all the incredible work that you've done. It's so rich. I don't know how many people are here, who all is here, but I really encourage everyone to read the multiple essays that LaJamia has written. The newest one for Decolonial Hacker, which I'm blanking on the name right now, has some of these maps that you're talking about. It sort of, in some ways really lays out that lineage of the map sort of both being a tool of state repression and that redeemed energetic form. I think you call it a talisman at some point, an act of love, as you said, Zahra. And just sort of these ways that you're offering us to both connect with our own practices as artists, and sort of the lineages that we claim for ourselves and find ourselves a part of. So thank you, and I will hand it back to
Yeah,
Mala.
I just want to add to that. Sorry, just
No,
taking up
Yeah,
more time.
Please
Yeah,
do.
that we don't all necessarily come from cultures that imagine drawings as flat, kind of de-spirited
yeah,
aesthetic objects, right? Many
totally.
of us come
Yeah.
from cultures that imagine drawings as sacred ceremonial processes, and as energetic, sacred forms. And so, yeah, I just wanted to add that to that kind of rethinking of the map form and the map practice as like something that could be a sacred and ceremonial process between a group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And I remember in our prep, you just said talisman, Fiza, but in our prep call, Zahra. I was really taken with the way you describe the map as an amulet. And I think that sacral kind of process of drawing and holding these forms in the same text you wrote about. You mentioned Fiza just at the end with the decolonial hacker and how the map has no trees, and then you talk to the guy whose land it is, and he's like, look at all these trees, look at the video shows all the trees. So it's just this playing with manipulating this form, and I think the hope that you imbue the form with and as an amulet or a talisman is so wonderful. I had my own question, but I don't need to have it because Hamad has very kindly also asked the same question. So I'm going to go open to the audience because I feel like it's a nice opportunity for everyone in the audience to kind of get their questions across. I'm going to start with Hamad's question. So he said, thank you for all your inspiring work, Zahra and Shahana. Can you talk a bit about the forms you use for your work to circulate outside the pedagogic space? So in the space of arts festivals and museums or gallery shows.
I can start with that. So the first project that me and Zahra did together was Exhausted Geographies, which was a publication project. And I think for the same reasons we turned to Karachi LaJamia. We started with this print project just because our critique and frustrations of the institution of the university also extended to the art and gallery space in Pakistan, where we felt like, again, that same sense of depoliticization, the need to break open those circuits and networks to imagine and create our own communities. Through the circulation of print work. And so, yeah, we've always really been drawn to that. And we often also talk with our friend Abira of how the process of making a publication is also making your building community, and you're in the circulation of it, you're also imagining a new community of people that come together around that object. But more recently, we have been showing Karachi LaJamia's work and research in gallery and museum spaces. And I think maybe this was 2 years ago where we really had this aha moment where I think someone had come to Zara's studio for a crit. And at that time we were sitting on a lot of work, a lot of archive, a lot of possibilities of things we could share. But there was really the sense of being unsure of how Karachi La Jamia would fit in a gallery space or an exhibition space, of how we didn't want to transform this work into display work or works to fit the needs of the gallery. And this person during this studio visit said to Zara that, instead of thinking of how Karachi La Jamia could transform into an exhibition, you need to think about how the museum and gallery, you can transform it into a pedagogical space. And it was the simplest thing, but it just really opened up a pathway for us to think about how to approach exhibiting some of the work that we're doing. And I think that conversation really helped us realize, okay, it made so much sense that what we need to be doing is creating pedagogical spaces through our display, and spaces where people can come together, sit together, comfortable spaces that also really emulate and evoke a lot of the community spaces in which so much of our work happens. So, whether they're libraries, whether they're small informal centers, whether it's also just dhabas. And so we've been really kind of trying to take inspiration from that to think about how can our how can our installation really be activated as a space of learning, as a space of sharing, and as a space of coming together.
Zahra, do you want to add anything to that, or you?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think we, again, Karachi LaJamia has never been like an object-oriented project. And so often, yeah, what we were doing on ground was the work and often we would end up with a body of documentation and visual or textual archives that were kind of built together between ourselves and those we were working with and the students who were participating in the courses. And it all felt like really rich, incredible world of knowledge that we did then want to circulate to larger publics. But then we were also really aware of just how sensitive a lot of that information is and all of the really big questions, not just of representation, but security and surveillance that also come up and visibility and all of that come up. So we have to be so careful with what we choose to share and what we don't choose to share. And I think because of that, Karachi Jamia and the 10 years that we've been doing this work has always worked on a very small scale. That's why we kind of call ourselves the nomadic space. We have to be able to kind of emerge and then go quiet for pieces for periods of time. And yeah, we have to be careful about questions of visibility at all times. And so I think because of that, it's been really slow work. But as Shahana said, over a period of time, we've accumulated a really vast archive that we then wanted to circulate among larger publics and thinking about like the museum and the exhibition and the gallery as like a space, as a hospitable space for that, where museums and galleries are not generally hospitable spaces, and thinking about museum and galleries also as these desacralized spaces for what we think is deeply sacred work that we're doing. So how do we kind of think against and beyond that? And yeah, I think as Shana was saying, that was kind of an aha moment of like, we all the work that we do is site specific. The courses that we put together are site specific, and the sites that we work in are sites where these like really incredible and intense moments of contestation are happening. But museums and galleries are also these spaces where intense moments of contestation are happening. And there's a long history of artists and art workers, working in that tradition. And so, yeah, and so I think that thinking about also the ways in which the gallery space and the exhibition space could serve the spirit of what we hope to do with Karachi LaJamia was a bit of a game changer for us in thinking about that.
Can I jump in real quick? So I think something that we didn't get to at all is the video works that you produce as well. Which, while like, it totally makes sense that that is not the goal of La Jamia to like produce like art objects or artworks that are then circulated in sort of certain modes of distribution. That work is also so valuable, like I think it also does so much of the work of contending with these politics of representation, as you're both mentioning, like kind of giving us, and these works are available online, right? Like for people to view. Is that true? Yeah. So they're on the website, Rakshas Railways, Jinnah Avenue, and so I just wanted to mention the way that they sort of offer solutions or strategies, like visual strategies as well, like these formal kind of aesthetic solutions or strategies, perhaps not solutions, to seeing the land or to relating to the land, like the sort of the way the camera work is done. There's like blurry imagery, there's like, shadows of people who stand in for like the figure. I mean, there's sort of these really rich formal decisions that are also being made in the works that have come out of the courses as well. And I think, I mean, we could get into that a lot more too, but I just kind of wanted to mention that when there has been work that has emerged out of the courses, that is, because I remember seeing, I think Rakshas Railways in Gandhara Art Space, I think it was, at an exhibition. And that was when I sort of first saw some of the visual work that you were doing, and it really kind of made me think about the figure in the landscape, which like as a painter I think about all the time, and just the way that you were offering a way of relating to that form and of sort of positioning and seeing that form that just felt totally like it blew my mind open, you know. So there is something to also the visual work that you're doing when things do become art objects as well that I just wanted to sort of advocate for.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself. Thank you so much. I thought that was such a rich answer as well, and something we were all talking about in our preparation calls as well. I know that there are a lot of calls for exhausted geographies to be reprinted. I know Nora and I would definitely like another copy. But I am also very aware that we could keep talking for ages. So I hope maybe one day we'll find a time to do part two of this talk if you guys are willing. But I wanted to really thank Fiza, Zahra, and Shahana for all of the time and preparation you put into this talk, and really for giving all of your like generosity of research and just speaking about everything you've been doing over the last 10 years. It's such an honor for us to kind of platform this retrospective talk. And I have really enjoyed, I mean, I've loved your practice for a long time, but enjoyed doing my own research as well in this process. So thank you so much for Zahra and Shahana, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining. If you have any colleagues or friends who did miss this, hopefully this talk will be up in October or November on our website and YouTube channel. So thank you so much. And I'm just going to click end. So the Zoom screen will end quite abruptly, but we look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.